Hello and welcome to Theology Thursday, a weekly video where I discuss a theological or biblical subject. This is the Bible. It is divided into two main sections. About 75% of it, 39 books, are called the Old Testament, Testament being a Latin word. The English word's the word covenant, so it's the Old Covenant. And then there are 27 books that compose about 25% of the Bible called the New Testament. One of the challenges is the relationship between those two. But I don't want to talk about that today, specifically in relation to the Old and New Testaments. I've done that in other videos in the past. But I want to talk about Old Testament religion and the modern Christian world. So just a quick history lesson. The first 11 chapters of the Bible are kind of introductory to everything. We find the beginning of creation, the first family, first marriage, husband and wife. There are two genders, male and female. First family, they have children. We find sin entering into our world. We find judgment kind of start over again after the flood. We find the founding of the nations, where the different descendants of Noah go out and form all these different nations in various places in what was then the known world. And then we get to chapter 12, and God's no longer dealing with the whole world. Now God's going to deal with the world through one particular family, and that is the family of Abraham. And so chapter 12, we get the call of Abraham. So they're called Hebrews. Now Abraham has a son named Isaac, then Isaac has a son named Jacob. But Jacob's name is later changed to Israel. And after his name is changed, he's sometimes still called Jacob and sometimes called Israel, kind of back and forth between the two. It's kind of like some people call me Paul and some people call me Chicken Man, and same person will call me by different names at different times. So it's just kind of the way it worked. So the descendants of him, and he had 12 sons, and from that we get the 12 tribes. They're the 12 families or 12 tribes of Israel, the descendants of this man Israel. So they're going to be called Israelites, even though they're still called Hebrews for a long time. Even in Egypt, they're still called Hebrews. So they can be called Hebrews or Israelites. Now that all works great until we have a division in 922, and the 10 northern tribes form a country, and they call themselves Israel. The southern tribe calls themselves Judah. So this is where it gets really interesting. This is where the word Jew comes from. They're from Judah, the tribe of Judah, not all 12. If somebody's from Issachar, they don't call themselves Jewish. The northern kingdom is destroyed in 922 BC, the southern kingdom in 586, but then they will return about 70 years later, as Jeremiah promised, under Ezra and later Nehemiah. They're going to rebuild the walls and all that kind of stuff. And so we have this rebuilding, and really it's not until they're in Babylonian captivity after 586 that they really are called Jews. The word Jew is used very rarely in the Old Testament, mostly in the book of Esther, and Esther's during that time there in Babylon, and then by Ezra and others. So Jews are actually so not everybody in the Old Testament is Jewish. In Jesus' day, it had become common to call everyone who was of Hebrew descent Jewish, even though they still knew their tribal identities. So, like, for example, the Apostle Paul talks about Jew and Gentile and being Jewish, even though he's from the tribe of Benjamin. He's technically not Jewish. He's not from the tribe of Judah, but it just became a general term. So ever since then, even till today, most people that trace that lineage call themselves Jews, even though most of them are not from the tribe of Judah. If you get to know them well enough, they will let you know that they're not technically Jewish, and they still know their tribal identification, whether it's Asher or Issachar or Manasseh or Ephraim or whoever it may happen to be, Zebulun or whatever. So now this is why this becomes important. While they were in captivity, no temple, no priesthood, no sacrifices. So how did they worship? Well, the synagogue arose in Babylon. So that's kind of that's the origin of the synagogue. And along with it was, why did we end up in captivity? What did we do wrong that God sent us here? The decision was we did not keep the law meticulously enough. So out of that rose a group of people that came from the Hebrew word parash, which means to be separate, to be very detailed, and that's where the word Pharisee comes from. And so that's where the Pharisees came from. They said, we will make sure that we will preserve the land by very meticulously observing the law. And they did that by writing a whole bunch of extra laws that aren't found in Scripture. And Jesus even addresses this. In AD 70, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus and the Roman armies after a rebellion by the Jews. And the temple's destroyed, the Ark of the Covenant, well, we don't know about the Ark of the Covenant. We know that the menorah and some of the other items from the temple were taken back to Rome, because in Rome, the Arch of Titus actually has those, and we see them carrying all of those back. Now, here's why this becomes important. After the destruction of the temple, there's only one strain of Judaism, Jewish practice, that survives. Anything that depended on the temple and sacrifices and all is going to die out pretty quickly. But Pharisee religion survived, and it has now survived for over 2,000 years. Okay? So this is what I want to make clear today on this video. Judaism, modern Judaism, does not follow the Bible. It doesn't try to interpret the Scripture, follow Scripture. It is based on what's called the Babylonian Talmud, which are mostly rules that were made up, or interpretations, I should say, that were given of what Old Testament says. And then now they follow this meticulously. They follow all these rules. So let me give you just an example. When electricity began to become prominent, could you use electricity on the Sabbath? Well, since electricity and fire are connected, and the law says you can't build a fire on the Sabbath, you cannot start a fire, you cannot start electricity. You can use it, but you can't start it. So you prepare your food on Friday afternoon, plug it into the wall in a heater, a little heating pan, and you put the timer on it. And it cuts on in the morning. You didn't start the electricity, the timer did. Elevators can't push the button because you're starting electricity. So the elevators stop every other floor, and you get off and walk up or down if you're on an even-numbered floor, called Sabbath elevators. All kinds of things like this. All kinds of rules and regulations which are not in Scripture. So here's why I want to say this. There's two things. One I think you find interesting. The other I think is important. So let me deal with the important one first, then we'll talk about the interesting one. So here's what's important. When you hear about, I see Christians like wanting to hear about Jewish practices. And somehow they think that what Jews do today is what they did in Old Testament times. And that's not true. That's what they did in New Testament times in Jesus' day that Jesus condemned. That's what they do. Especially the Orthodox Jewish strains, and there are about a dozen of those. But that's like that. They're Pharisees. That's what they're not. They're not practicing Old Testament religion. None of them are. Judaism, which is the modern practice of religious practice of Jews, is not Old Testament religion. And it concerns me sometimes when Christians get all worked up about all these things Jewish people do. Star of David is not biblical. I know that shocks you. It's actually a symbol for the Assyrian sun god, Asher. I don't make this up, but what's known as the Star of David is found in all kinds of Assyrian document stuff on their chariot wheels and everything as the symbol for their sun god. All the shawls they have to wear at certain times, and all the always moving when they're praying. And they don't even pray. I know this may stun you. They don't pray like you and I do. Usually Jews get a book and they read prayers that people have written. That's why you see them. Those aren't in the Bible they're reading. They're just reading prayers that people have written, and they just repeat them. It was Jesus condemned. So be very, very careful about confusing modern Judaism practices with what is taught in the Old Testament. They are not the same. And much of what modern Judaism does, Jesus condemned. Let me just tell you something interesting. When the nation of Israel was founded, lots of different Jewish people came, and this may shock you. Only about 40% of modern Israel is atheist. They don't believe in any God of any kind. They're Jewish. That's the way they identify themselves ethnically, but religiously they're nothing. And then there are various versions of Judaism that you'll see. Some people wear the yarmulke. Some there are different branches. There's Orthodox, Reformed, Conservative. They're kind of all over the map. Not nearly as many Reformed in the land of Israel, but anyway. when it was founded, and a lot of Chassidim, a lot of the Hasidic Jews, they're the ones who wear the black coats, the black hats, the curly sideburns, and all that kind of stuff. When they began to immigrate, they are not required to serve in the military, and that's been a sticking point in recent years. There's been a lot of legislation proposed to require them to serve in the military. They oftentimes don't even have to have a job. They are state sponsored, and so they don't work. They spend a lot of time reading the Torah, just reading it. Now they don't, the focus on pronouncing it correctly. They don't read it like you and me. They read to pronounce it correctly. That's what they're doing. Going over to the Western Wall and praying, or going to Kavir David, the David's tomb, and praying, or whatever it is. And what they will tell you is, we are protecting and preserving the nation spiritually. And they'll go all the way back to the Babylonian captivity, when the decision was, we're here because we didn't keep the rules well enough. And they will say, we are keeping the rules meticulously so that God will keep us in the land. God will protect us and preserve us and keep us in the land if enough of us do this. Like, that's the mentality. And there ain't a shred of that in Scripture anywhere. So I'm not being anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish by any stretch. I love to go to Israel. But the reality is, when modern Christians take modern Jewish practices and try to think, oh, well, that's how they did it in, like in Old Testament times, that's simply not correct. The modern strain of Judaism really is much more based on Pharisee religion than it is what I will call Mosaic religion. So I just hope this might help you. Please be careful. We don't really need all that stuff. I know some of it's kind of cool, but it's not really needed. I own a shofar, I own a tallit. I've got some of this stuff. I've got the tassels for the corners, what are called tzitzis, and all that sort of stuff. I'm a Hebrew professor, for crying out loud. But we just really need to be careful that we make sure that what we do is based on Scripture and what the Bible teaches, not on what we see somebody in modern Judaism doing and somehow think it's been that way since Old Testament times. Actually, cases, oftentimes that's not that way. So I hope this helps you a little bit to, again, go back to what I think is the most important thing in life. That's to be rooted and grounded in Scripture, not modern practices that we pick up, so rooted in Scripture. This is our authority, and this is what we follow. So, I hope this helps you a little bit, and I hope you have a great day and a fantastic week. So God bless you.